Hi, I'm Greg Maxwell and welcome to the Dogwood Guitar Shop. Today I want to talk about electric guitar setup, specifically electric guitars with bolt-on necks. Fender, Strats, and Tellys are probably the two best known models, but it could be any brand, any type of guitar that has a bolt-on style neck. Now today in the shop I have a G&L Legacy. These are great guitars. We're going to get to this guitar in just a minute. But the topic of today's video is why these types of guitars often need more than just a setup in order to play well. Frequently I have players bring me this type of a guitar and they'll say, I think it just needs a setup, or please just do a basic setup on it. And sometimes that's in fact all that's needed. But most of the time a guitar with a bolt-on neck is going to require more than just a setup. And today we want to look at some of the factors that are involved in setting up this type of a guitar and in getting it to play its very best and all that's involved with that. So this G&L Legacy is in the shop today for a setup. Now this is new old stock, which means this guitar is practically brand new. It's in unplayed condition, but it's several years old, and the owner brought it to me for a setup. And we're going to evaluate this guitar and discuss some of the issues that are common with this type of a guitar that has this bolt-on neck. Now in general I find that G&L guitars are very well made. I really like the fit and finish on them. Matter of fact, as the story goes, that's why Leo Fender broke ties with the company that bears his name and started G&L, because he was tired of the quality control issues that were involved. I don't know all the in-depth facts about that, but I do know that I have a much easier time in general setting up G&Ls than I do the average Fender. But the issues involved and the geometry that's involved are the same with both brands and any brand of guitar that has this type of construction. So normally when we do a setup, we would evaluate things such as how flat the neck is, and that's adjustable with the truss rod, how high the string action is, measured at the 12th fret and at the 1st fret. That's determined up here by the depth of the nut slots, and it's determined at the 12th fret by the height of the bridge or the height of the saddles. In this particular guitar there's a floating trem, and I can tell by looking at it that it's out of adjustment, so that's going to need adjusted. The pickups are too low, so those will need adjusted. These are all things that are covered in a basic setup. Now when we lay a straight edge on the neck of this guitar, and this is a notched straight edge, so it will read the actual board itself and bypass the frets. I can see this guitar has what I would call an average amount of relief or up bow in the neck. And I'm going to take this feeler gauge. This is a 6/1000 feeler gauge, and this is about the average relief I like to set up both acoustic and electric guitars with. Some a little bit more, some a little bit less, depending on the guitar and the player's style. And measuring at the 5th fret, we don't get 6/1000, but as we proceed up the neck, we get to the 7th fret, we've got a comfortable 6/1000 on up, and a little bit more as we approach the 12th fret. And that's about what we like to see. We like to see the influence of the truss rod influencing this area of the neck between about the 3rd fret and the 9th fret, somewhere in that area. Now if we lay a straight edge on the top of the frets themselves, and that's measurements not always necessarily the same as the wood, I can see that this bolt-on neck has the typical issue that I'm making contact here at the 1st fret and I'm making contact here at the last fret, and I do have most of my relief in this middle area of the neck where I like to see it, but I really should be making contact somewhere in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th fret, and then I like to see a gradual fall away in this area that we refer to as the tongue, this part of the neck that extends into the body. But instead I've got a slight rise in the tongue, and that almost always contributes to buzzing in the upper register of the guitar. It's a very, very common issue associated with the bolt-on neck. Why is that? Well, I have a few theories. One is that on a bolt-on type neck we have exposed end grain, and end grain absorbs more moisture than long grain, and it's frequently the case that it's just the last couple of frets here that are swelled up or kicked up on this type of a neck, which leads me to believe that maybe it's absorbed some moisture in through that end grain, and it really only takes a few thousandths of an inch of height there to get some buzzing. Another common explanation is sometimes these necks are shimmed. Matter of fact, some models of bolt-on type necks provide an adjustment where on the back of the guitar, this one doesn't have one, but on the back of the guitar here through the plate, you can insert an Allen wrench and you can adjust the pitch or the angle of the neck. I don't like to see that because I don't like anything that disrupts the neck to body coupling, which gives us the best tone. But it's also possible that that little piece of metal in there that adjusts and creates that adjustment in the neck angle could cause an issue with this tongue kicking up a little bit or putting a kink in the neck as we tighten the screws that hold the neck to the body. However, my favorite theory for why most of these necks have this rise in the tongue is because if you think about it, the bolt-on neck was designed to be mass-produced economically out of a flat board. That was the whole idea behind it. So there's no backward peg head angle like we have on an acoustic guitar. It's just milled out of a flat piece of wood. And these necks are mass-produced in the factories. The frets are all pressed in by a machine. There's probably not any precision leveling done of the frets. They're just flattened on a flat piece of wood and shipped out, and good enough is good enough. But what happens when you take this flat piece of wood, you put 4 screws in the end and bolt it solidly to the body, and then you put string tension on this guitar? Well, we've got the truss rod exerting influence in this area to hold this part of the neck more or less flat. And my theory is that that string tension causes this area of the neck to just kick up a little bit as that string tension is applied. So on some of these guitars, we see just a few thousandths of this high tongue area, these high frets on the tongue. And in some cases, it's really, really bad. I've seen over 20 thousandths of height on these frets compared to the rest of the neck. So this guitar may or may not need additional fret work. There's not a whole lot of rise in these tongue frets, and I won't really know until I get more involved in the setup and see how the guitar plays after the basic geometry is established. Now, on the other side of my shop here, I've got another guitar mounted in my neck jig. It was also brought in for just a setup. It's an American-made Fender Strat. Now, when I applied these tools to that guitar and did a preliminary assessment before doing the setup, I could see right away that that guitar was going to give me as a luthier serious trouble in doing a setup. Why is that? Well, this guitar has a couple of major issues, and it's a worst case example. Most Fenders and most bolt-on necks are not as bad as this next guitar that we're going to look at. But in this particular guitar, the truss rod will not adjust the neck flat. And by that I mean, and I'll just use this guitar again as an example, but when I adjust the rod tight, I would expect to be able to adjust this neck more or less dead flat. Ideally, I would like to even be able to adjust the neck so that it goes into a little bit of a back bow. Now, I would never leave it like that, but I like to be able to at least have that much adjustment so that assures that wherever I want to adjust that neck to, I can. And I like to adjust the necks as flat as possible. Usually a few thousandths of relief is necessary. On this particular Strat that's over in the neck jig, when I adjust the rod as tight as I can safely adjust it, I still have a huge amount of relief in the neck. And worse than that, the relief is not in the area of the neck where it should be. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I like to see the truss rod exert most of its influence in this area of the neck here between the 3rd and the 9th frets. On this particular guitar, this 1st through the 5th area of the neck adjusts almost dead flat, and then there's the big dip in the neck. Right about at the 12th fret, there's over 20 thousandths of extra relief there, and then the tongue kicks way up on this guitar. So it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to just set that guitar up. it's going to require some additional work. And what's usually required on these bolt-on necks to get them to really play well without a lot of buzzing in the upper register is a fret leveling. Now, fret level is a process by which we level all the frets on the entire neck and adjust them so that the entire playing surface, the plane of all the frets, is completely even with no irregularities, no high frets. Then we can adjust, relieve, do the setup at the bridge saddles and all that, and restore the guitar to correct geometry. And we got a really good, relatively buzz-free playing guitar. When you can't adjust the neck flat with a rod, or when you have such an excessive amount of height in the tongue, or when there are humps and dips in the neck, as often is seen also, makes it really difficult sometimes to even do a good fret leveling. Now I've got this Fender Strat mounted over on the neck jig, and I've got the frets masked off, and we're going to go over and start to level these frets, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we discuss the issues that this guitar has. We'll see what we can do and see if we can at least get this guitar playable, because as it was brought into the shop, it was completely unplayable. So I will see you over at the neck jig. Okay, so we have our Fender American Strat jigged up in the neck jig. We've got our notched straight edge sitting on top of the fretboard, and we've got the peg head jacked up to simulate string tension. So this neck is profiled just the way it would be with the strings under tension, and you can see that we're making contact at the 3rd fret. Okay, but we're not making contact at the 1st fret. You can tell by the backlit area there in the gap. So this tells us that we have a hump in this neck at the 3rd fret. And then as we proceed up the neck, the gap increases, and at that 12th fret we have about 20 thousandths of gap there. And then as we move up onto the tongue, there's a big rise in our straight edges making contact at those last 3 or 4 frets there. So this is not a good situation, because the truss rod, as I mentioned, on this guitar is already adjusted as tight as it can go, and with this neck adjusted as flat as we can get it, we still have this big gap area. So what we're going to do now is blue the tops of these frets and then work on these high areas with our sanding beam. Now we're not going to be able to level all the frets like we normally would. We're going to have some low areas that we're not going to touch. But we're going to take that high area on the tongue way down, and we're going to work on that hump area at the 2nd, 3rd, 4th frets, and hopefully level this neck out to the point where we'll greatly reduce the buzzing and make this neck play much better than it did when we first started. So I've taken just a couple of passes with the sanding beam, and we can immediately see the high areas. We're high there at the 2nd and 3rd frets as we expected. We're high on the tongue, and we're high on most of the frets on the bass side, and we haven't hit anything on the treble side yet. So let's keep going. And now we've completed the leveling on this guitar for as far as we can go. We've leveled up the first 3 or 4 frets. We've spent quite a bit of time on the tongue and taken these tongue frets down about 14 or 15 thousandths. We have to stop here. This is about as good as we can go on this particular guitar. So I've uninstalled the guitar from off the neck jig, brought it back over to the bench. I've crowned all the frets to restore the nice round tops on them, polished them all up. We've oiled the fretboard, and this guitar is playing much, much better. We've been able to do a setup and got the action at the 12th fret down where it needs to be. We found out after we were able to lower the action into a much more reasonable range than the way it came in, this guitar also needed a new nut because the slots were too low, and with the action super high it wasn't noticeable, but now that the action's down, there was tremendous buzzing at the 1st fret. So in addition to the fret leveling, we also needed a new nut. This is very common how things go in the guitar shop. You start off with a setup, and certain things happen in a progression, and we can end up putting a lot more work into a guitar than the owner might plan on bringing it in. However, we've taken this guitar from virtually non-playable condition to where it's now a pretty good player. There's still some buzzing with the situation with this neck without being able to be adjusted completely flat. We struggle to do. fret leveling that would be, you know, as good as we normally could do with most bolt-on necks, but we've greatly improved it. The little bit of buzzing that's on here probably won't be noticeable through an amp, and this neck and playability of this guitar is so vastly improved over the way it came in. I'm sure that despite the extra work and expense, the owner is gonna love it now. And I hope that you've enjoyed this video. We've gone into some of the details about why guitars, especially electric guitars with bolt-on necks, often need a lot more work than just a setup. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.